I work the late shift at a small-town diner somewhere in the Midwest. The kind of place where the neon sign outside buzzes and flickers like it's one bad storm away from dying for good. I'm 27, and this is my first real job after college, mostly because it was the only place hiring on such short notice. The diner sits on the edge of town, the only light for miles, with a cracked parking lot and a few rusty picnic tables out front. Inside, it's all chrome and vinyl booths, the smell of frying bacon and burnt coffee hanging in the air like a familiar ghost. Most nights, it's quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that presses on your ears and makes every creak and drip louder than it should be. You can hear the steady hum of the grill, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, and the occasional drip-drip of rain hitting the roof. The rain is almost always there these days, like it's trying to wash the place clean, but never quite succeeding. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting a pale, sickly glow that makes the grease-streaked windows look like they're holding back some kind of darkness outside. It's the kind of place where the few customers you get are either regulars who come in every night or strangers passing through town, looking for a place to stretch their legs and grab a hot meal before heading back onto the road. The regulars often sit in the same booths, nursing their coffee and talking in low voices about things that don't quite sound right when you listen closely. I've learned to keep my head down, smile politely, and not ask too many questions. The diner feels like a comfortable routine, almost like a safety net in this otherwise empty stretch of highway. But sometimes, that safety net feels thinner than I'd like. I moved here from a bigger city down south, where the late-night diners were loud and crowded, full of life until the early morning. Here, it's different. People are kind but distant. They don't make small talk. They don't ask about your day. Instead, they slide into a booth, order their meal, and stare out the window like they're waiting for something or someone that never comes. It took me a while to get used to it, the way the silence can feel heavy, like it's waiting to swallow you whole. On one of my first shifts, I remember standing behind the counter, wiping down the already shiny surface when the rain started coming down harder. The neon sign outside flickered erratically, casting long, thin shadows across the diner's linoleum floor. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, and I was alone except for the old man sitting by the window, staring into his cup of black coffee. The hum of the fridge and the distant rumble of thunder were the only sounds breaking the silence. That night, like many others, I thought about how diners have this strange duality. To the people outside, they're cozy refuges, places where you can grab a bite, warm up from the cold, or just watch the world go by. But inside, behind those greasy counters and battered menus, strange things happen. Moments that don't make sense, shadows that don't belong, and stories that customers never tell. It's like the diner is a stage for secrets, and every night brings a new act. I learned early on that the regulars don't just come for food. They come because the diner is one of the few places left where they can be seen and not judged. But it can also be a place where loneliness turns into something darker. Sometimes, when the rain beats harder against the windows and the neon sign sputters like it's about to give up, you start to feel like you're part of something bigger, a story that's been playing out here long before you showed up. The kitchen is small and cramped, with a grill that's seen better days and a coffee pot that's been on almost nonstop for years. The cooks move with a kind of tired efficiency, flipping eggs and flipping off the clock at the same time. The smell of grease and burnt sugar clings to everything, and the fluorescent lights above the stove buzz in tune with the old jukebox in the corner. Some nights, the jukebox plays songs nobody seems to want, looping the same sad melodies over and over. I remember one rainy evening, standing behind the counter, tracing the condensation on the window with my finger as I watched the headlights of cars passing by on the empty road. The diner felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. And that's when it hit me. This place, for all its warmth and familiarity, is also a kind of trap. A place where people come to hide, or forget, or maybe even disappear without anyone noticing. Sometimes, a customer will come in, look around like they're searching for something they lost long ago, and then sit down quietly, as if they've been coming here every night for years. They order the same thing, say the same words, and leave the same emptiness behind. The diner becomes a kind of mirror, reflecting the shadows of those who pass through. And me? I'm just the one who keeps the lights on, the coffee hot, and the stories unfolding in the silence. Most nights, the rain keeps falling, the neon sign buzzes, and the diner hums with the quiet rhythm of routine. But underneath it all, there's a feeling, a faint, creeping sense, that the diner holds more than just memories and meals. It holds secrets, dark ones. And sometimes, when the night stretches on and the world outside feels far away, you realize those secrets are watching you back. A few weeks into working the late shift, I started to notice a regular who unsettled me more than most. His name was Mr. Hayes, or at least that's what the others called him. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, with thinning gray hair and a face that looked like it had been weathered by years of hard living. He wore a worn-out coat, buttoned up tight even though the diner was warm inside, and he always sat alone at the booth closest to the back door. At first, Mr. Hayes seemed like any other customer, quiet and unassuming. He'd order a black coffee and a slice of pie, and spend hours staring out the window, lost in thought. But over time, I noticed something strange. He started muttering under his breath, whispering words I couldn't catch, like he was talking to someone no one else could see. His eyes would dart around the diner, watching the other patrons with this intense, almost predatory gaze that made my skin crawl. One night, I was wiping down tables when I caught him staring directly at me. Not just a glance, but a full-on, piercing stare that felt like it was trying to look right through me. I smiled nervously and asked if he needed anything else. He didn't respond, just nodded slowly and went back to staring at the door like he was waiting for something or someone. As the weeks went on, his behavior grew more erratic. He'd lean closer to the kitchen door, whispering phrases that didn't make sense, like, "They're coming," or "It's almost time." Sometimes, he'd refuse to leave even after closing, sitting there in the darkened diner with the neon sign flickering outside, his coat collar pulled up against the cold that wasn't there. My coworkers started to get uneasy, but no one said anything, probably because no one wanted to confront him or risk whatever mood he was in. One night, a few of us stayed late to clean up after closing. I was stacking plates when I heard a strange rustling from the booth where Mr. Hayes usually sat. I looked over and saw him hunched over, his coat pulled tight, as if he were hiding something underneath. I asked if he needed help, but he just shook his head without looking up. Curious and a little nervous, I glanced at the edge of his coat and caught a glimpse of something metal, something cold and sharp. My heart raced. I wasn't sure what it was, but it didn't feel right. I told one of the other employees, who suggested we call the police, but I hesitated. Mr. Hayes had never been violent before, just strange. I didn't want to make things worse. But then, the night took a darker turn. As we were about to lock up, Mr. Hayes suddenly stood up and moved toward the kitchen door, his coat flapping open just enough to reveal the glint of a knife tucked inside. He was whispering louder now, almost chanting, and his eyes looked wild, like he'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. I froze behind the counter, heart pounding, unsure whether to run or call out. Another employee quietly dialed 911 while I kept an eye on him. Mr. Hayes reached the door, paused, and then turned slowly to face us, his expression unreadable. He said nothing, but the tension in the air was suffocating. The police arrived minutes later, though it felt like hours. They approached cautiously, asking him to put the knife down. Mr. Hayes didn't resist, but didn't explain anything either. After a brief search, they found nothing else hidden on him, just the knife and a small, folded piece of paper tucked inside his coat pocket. One of the officers unfolded the paper and read aloud, a series of cryptic phrases that made no immediate sense. Mentions of the Watchers, the coming darkness, and the last signal. It felt like a puzzle written in code, something out of a horror novel rather than a small-town diner. Mr. Hayes was taken away quietly, without protest, but the unease lingered long after he was gone. The booth where he used to sit felt colder somehow, like the diner had absorbed some of his restless energy. For days, I kept checking the back door, half expecting him to return or someone else to take his place. The other employees whispered about him in hushed tones, sharing rumors about his past. Some said he'd lost his family, others that he'd been a soldier with secrets too heavy to carry. None of it really mattered to me. What stuck with me was the feeling that Mr. Hayes wasn't just a man with strange habits. He was a warning, a sign that something darker could be lurking beneath the surface of this quiet diner. After that night, I started paying closer attention to the regulars, noticing how some of them would glance nervously toward the back door or suddenly stop talking when a shadow passed outside. The diner felt less like a refuge and more like a thin barrier between us and something we couldn't fully understand. One evening, a few days after Mr. Hayes' arrest, I was closing up when I heard a faint tapping coming from the kitchen. It was slow and deliberate, like someone trying to get my attention without making noise. I called out, but no one answered. When I checked, the kitchen was empty, the grill cold, and the coffee pot silent. I shrugged it off as my imagination until I noticed the back door was slightly ajar, even though I was sure I'd locked it. The rain had stopped, but a chill ran down my spine as I closed the door and double-checked the locks. That night, I didn't sleep well, haunted by the feeling that Mr. Hayes' presence hadn't truly left the diner. Since then, I've kept a closer eye on the shadows that seem to gather near the back door, the whispers that sometimes drift through the air when the diner is empty, and the regulars who seem to carry invisible burdens heavier than the meals they order. Mr. Hayes was just the beginning, a glimpse into the unseen threats that hide behind the neon glow and the hum of the grill. I don't know what the cryptic note meant or what Mr. Hayes was waiting for, but I can't shake the feeling that the diner holds more secrets than anyone realizes. Some nights, when the rain pounds harder and the neon flickers like it's struggling to stay alive, I swear I can hear the faintest whisper, calling out from the darkness just beyond the back door. One night, about a week after the incident with Mr. Hayes, the diner was quiet, too quiet, even for a late shift. The rain had stopped, but the air outside felt heavy and still, like the calm before a storm. I was wiping down the counter when the front door creaked open, and a woman stepped inside. She looked out of place, tall, with sharp features and eyes that didn't quite meet mine. Her coat was soaked, though the rain had stopped, and she clutched a small purse close to her chest. She glanced around the diner, her breath visible in the cold air, and said in a clipped voice, "I'm lost. Can I use your phone?" The words were polite but distant, like she was reciting a line she'd said 1,000 times before. I nodded, pointing to the wall phone near the kitchen. She moved slowly, eyes flicking to the corners of the room as if expecting something, or someone, to appear. I watched her from behind the counter, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. There was something off about her, not just the way she spoke, but the way she moved, stiff and guarded, like she was on edge. She didn't order anything, just stood by the phone, dialing a number but not speaking when it connected. Instead, she listened, her jaw clenched tight, and after a few moments, hung up without saying a word. As she lingered near the phone, I started to notice strange noises from the back of the diner, soft thuds and faint scraping sounds coming from the storage room and the old employee locker area. The lights flickered for a moment, casting long shadows across the walls, and the jukebox in the corner crackled, playing a warped version of a song nobody had selected. I asked if she wanted coffee or something warm, but she shook her head, eyes fixed on the back door. "I shouldn't stay," she whispered, more to herself than to me. The tension in the diner thickened, the air growing colder despite the heaters humming quietly. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to check the source of the noises. I told her to wait behind the counter, which she did, still clutching her purse like a lifeline. I stepped toward the kitchen door, the sound of dripping water echoing faintly beyond. As I opened the door to the storage room, the smell of damp wood and something metallic hit me. The scraping sound stopped abruptly. I flipped the light switch, but the bulbs flickered and died, plunging me into near darkness. Heart racing, I fumbled for my phone to use its flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing overturned boxes and scattered tools. Something had clearly been rummaging through the supplies, not long ago. A sudden creak from the locker room made me jump. I shone the light that way and saw the door slightly open, swaying as if someone had just stepped out. I called out, but there was no answer. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing in on me from all sides. I hurried back to the front, where the woman was still standing, pale and tense. "Did you hear that?" I asked quietly. She nodded but didn't say anything. Her eyes were fixed on the back door, which remained tightly shut. Just then, the neon sign outside sputtered and went dark, plunging the diner into near darkness except for the soft glow of the emergency exit lights. The power flickered back on moments later, but the atmosphere had shifted. The warmth I'd felt earlier was replaced by something cold and unsettling. I asked if she wanted to leave, but she hesitated, then said, "I'm waiting for someone. They said they'd come." Her voice was barely audible, almost lost in the hum of the kitchen appliances restarting. I wanted to believe she was just a lost traveler, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But as the minutes dragged on, the strange noises returned. Soft footsteps pacing just beyond the kitchen door, faint whispers I couldn't make out. The jukebox played a low, distorted melody that didn't match any song on the playlist. The woman kept glancing nervously at the clock, tapping her foot as if the wait was unbearable. I tried to distract her with small talk, but she gave only short answers, her eyes never leaving the door. Then, suddenly, the back door creaked open a crack, and a cold draft swept through the diner. The woman stiffened, her face paling even more. I moved toward the door, ready to check again, but before I could reach it, she grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and whispered, "Don't go back there." Not yet. I stopped, heart pounding, torn between fear and curiosity. She looked at me with an urgency that was impossible to ignore. Something was wrong. Whatever she was waiting for wasn't just a person, it was something else. Something dangerous. We stood there in the dim light, the rain starting up again outside, tapping rhythmically against the windows. The diner felt smaller, the shadows longer, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The strange noises from the back grew louder, scratches, whispers, the faint sound of breathing that wasn't ours. I glanced back at the woman. She was trembling now, eyes wide and searching the darkness beyond the kitchen. "They're here," she said, voice barely a whisper. Suddenly, the jukebox cut off, and the diner was silent except for the rain and our breathing. The neon sign outside flickered back to life, casting eerie red and blue hues across the floor. Then, without warning, the back door slammed shut with a force that made the windows rattle. The woman let out a sharp breath and sank into a booth, burying her face in her hands. I wanted to ask what was going on, but the words caught in my throat. The diner had transformed from a safe haven to a place where unseen threats lurked, and I wasn't sure if we were the hunters or the hunted. That night, I realized the diner wasn't just a backdrop for lonely souls or restless travelers. It was a threshold, a thin line between the ordinary and something far more sinister. And sometimes, visitors like the woman weren't just lost or scared. They were warnings. Messengers from the edge of whatever darkness was creeping closer. I stayed with her until the night ended, watching the back door and listening to the strange noises that never quite stopped. The diner's flickering lights and whispering shadows kept me awake long after closing, reminding me that some nights, the most terrifying visitors aren't the ones who come through the door. They're the ones who bring the darkness with them. A few days after the strange woman's visit, the diner felt heavier than usual, like the air inside had thickened with something unseen. The rain had finally stopped, but the dampness clung to the walls and floors, making the place feel colder than it looked. The usual hum of the grill and clatter of dishes was there, but there was an edge to everything, a quiet tension that I couldn't shake. That night, a man I hadn't seen before walked in just before midnight. He was middle-aged, with a worn leather jacket and tired eyes that scanned the diner like he was searching for something or someone. He sat at the counter, ordered a coffee and a sandwich, and then settled into silence. Unlike the others, he didn't seem interested in the usual small talk or the comfort of routine. He was distant, almost haunted, and when I brought him his meal, he barely touched it. He stayed for nearly an hour, occasionally glancing at the door, as if waiting for a sign. Then, without warning, he left the diner without paying or saying a word. I stood behind the counter, watching him disappear into the night, an uneasy feeling settling in my chest. The next morning, the diner opened to an unusual sight. His belongings were left behind, a wallet, a pair of gloves, and a worn notebook filled with scribbled notes and maps. Nobody knew who he was, and when I called the police to report the abandoned items, they told me a man matching his description was reported missing under suspicious circumstances just a few days earlier. The thought that he might have come here seeking help or answers sent a shiver through me. The diner, it seemed, was more than just a place for meals. It was a crossroads for lost souls and unfinished stories. Over the following days, strange things started happening around his usual spot, the booth near the window where he had sat. The air felt colder there, even when the heaters were on full blast. The lights flickered sporadically, and sometimes, when I passed by, I could swear I felt a presence, like someone was watching me from the shadows. One evening, as I was closing up, I heard a faint whisper coming from that booth. I stopped, heart pounding, and scanned the empty diner. There was no one there, but the whispering grew louder, a soft murmur of words I couldn't quite make out. I sat down in the booth, clutching a cup of coffee to steady my nerves. The air was icy against my skin, and the shadows in the corners seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. I tried to focus on the quiet hum of the fridge and the distant rumble of thunder, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the notebook the man had left behind. The pages were filled with frantic writing, names, dates, coordinates, and references to the watcher and the forgotten. It read like a journal of someone chasing shadows, trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't want to be solved. As I flipped through the pages, a chill ran down my spine. One entry mentioned a diner much like ours, a place where the lost gather and the walls remember. It was as if the man believed this diner held some key to whatever darkness had been following him. After that night, the booth became a quiet reminder of the man who disappeared and the mysteries he carried. The cold spots remained, and sometimes the lights flickered in patterns that didn't match the wiring. Other employees whispered about strange noises, footsteps in empty hallways, the soft clinking of dishes when no one was around. One night, I was closing alone when I heard the unmistakable sound of a chair scraping against the floor near that booth. I turned quickly, expecting to see someone, but the diner was empty except for me. The echo of the scraping lingered, and for a moment, the air felt thick with something unspoken. I sat down in the booth again, notebook in hand, trying to make sense of the man's frantic writings. The words seemed to blur and shift, as if the pages themselves were alive, resisting the truth they held. I felt a strange connection to him, a shared sense of being caught between the ordinary and something far darker. The diner, I realized, wasn't just a place where meals were served. It was a vessel for stories left unfinished, memories trapped in the walls, and souls who never quite found their way out. The presence of the forgotten customer lingered, a silent specter in the background of every quiet night. From then on, whenever I passed that booth, I'd pause and glance around, half expecting to see the man's shadow watching from the corner. The flickering lights and cold spots were reminders that some stories never end, and some customers never truly leave. The diner had become a place where the lost were remembered, or maybe where they were trapped, waiting for someone to hear their story and set them free. And every night I worked, I felt the weight of those stories pressing in, reminding me that beneath the neon glow and the smell of stale coffee, there was something far more haunting waiting just beneath the surface. After all the nights I've spent behind the counter, the late shifts filled with flickering neon lights and whispered secrets, my view of this diner has changed completely. What once felt like a safe, familiar place, a refuge from the cold and the quiet town outside, now feels like a thin veil stretched over something much darker. The diner is no longer just a stop for coffee and pie. It's a crossroads where the ordinary and the unsettling collide, and where hidden horrors unfold in plain sight. I've learned to trust my instincts here, even when everything seems calm. There's a strange energy that lingers in the air, a tension beneath the surface that warns you to stay alert. It's in the way the lights flicker without cause, the cold spots that creep into the booths, and the faint whispers that drift through the empty corners when no one else is around. You feel watched, even when the diner is empty, like the walls themselves hold memories of things better left forgotten. The stories I've lived through, the man with the knife, the lost woman waiting for something unseen, the forgotten customer who vanished without a trace, have all left their mark on me. They have taught me that danger doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it hides in plain sight, in the quiet moments between customers, in the shadows cast by a flickering sign, or in the silence after the last dish is washed. I've come to see that these stories are warnings as much as they are mysteries. They remind me that the world isn't always what it seems, and that the places we think are safe can be the very ones where darkness gathers. The diner, with its cracked windows and humming grill, is a stage for those hidden horrors, moments where the ordinary slips away and something else takes its place. Working here has also taught me the importance of awareness. It's easy to get comfortable, to let the routine dull your senses, but out here, that could be dangerous. I've learned to listen closely, to the sounds that don't belong, to the silences that feel too heavy, to the people who come in with stories they don't tell. Trusting those instincts, even when no one else does, has become my way of staying safe. And yet, despite the fear and the unease, there's a strange pull to this place. Maybe it's because the diner holds stories that need to be heard, or because it's a refuge for those caught between worlds. Or maybe it's just the desperate hope that by shining a light on these shadows, we can keep the darkness at bay. But the truth is, I don't know if the diner will ever be truly safe. There will always be those nights when the neon sign flickers just a little too long, when the rain pounds harder against the windows, and when the quiet feels like it's waiting to swallow you whole. Those are the nights I remember Mr. Hayes, the woman who waited without a visitor, and the man who disappeared but never left. They are reminders that sometimes the scariest stories happen right under our noses, in the most ordinary places. And that sometimes, the real horror is knowing that what we can't see might be watching us back, waiting for its moment to step out of the shadows. So, I keep working the late shift, pouring coffee, wiping down counters, and keeping the lights on as best I can. I watch the door, listen to the whispers, and try to stay one step ahead of whatever's lurking just beyond the glow of the neon sign. Because in this diner, the line between comfort and fear is thinner than I ever imagined. And sometimes, that line is all that stands between us and the darkness.